Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today and talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I do in theater and technology and theater and gaming. And it's a constant reminder, do I click forward with this button? Yes? Okay, thanks. That so much of the world that we work with in theatrical and performance sort of bases has a huge component in our everyday lives. I talk to students all the time about how everything from the sports you watch or participate in have elements of play, performance, choices, and elements that are happening, to the politicians that we see day to day, performing their ethics, their politics, their policies, and how we handle PR, all the different ways in which we are theatricalizing our everyday life become part of our experiences as people, both on stage and off stage. I'm in the Department of Theater, where we focus very much on actor training, body movement, voice, as well as history and theory. But I'm a new component of performance theory, and performance theory takes up the idea that everything from how I've dressed today to how I'm positioning myself to how I'm, speaking to you is an element of theatrical choice. Not malicious choice, but the things we do day to day help to characterize our appearance, our self, our visuality, and everything coming forward. Likewise, video games have evolved vastly in new, interesting ways to talk to us about narrative, ethical, and personal decisions that we make. So today what I want to do is talk a little bit about how we look at video games as theatrical enterprises and how some of these different elements are kind of changing our discussion as theater moves into more online or different components. Could I ask, has anyone seen even a regular play that involves narrative choices or things that you can do, choices, directions, and did you have different outcomes as a result of those choices compared to other people?
Depending on the game. Yeah.
Depending on the game? Has anyone seen a show that's asked you to make choices about direction? Otherwise, sorry?
Bandersnatch.
Okay, yeah. So something like Bandersnatch as well. Any Sleep No More people? Anyone seen Sleep No More in New York City? It's a 5-hour immersive Macbeth where you can follow anyone, anywhere, through 5 levels of an old 1940s hotel. And you can just spend all your time with Lady Macbeth, or follow Duncan, or follow the witches, or maybe lose a witch and find a new witch, wherever you want to go, interacting with everything. It's the closest thing that I've ever seen to the gamification of a theater sort of principle. When we play games, we spend time noticing specific elements. And what you're actually doing is you're spending time, like we do in the theater department, dramaturging your experience. You're asking yourself, why did someone choose this word, this idea, this point, this sort of person or personage or representation to characterize something? So part of what we're doing in performance theory and looking at some of these different elements is thinking about how the video games for us provide us with a different way to think about our interactive potential in playing these different sort of examples. And this is interactive software. This is by Quantic Dream. This was a game developed in May 2018, so it's still fairly recent. It is available in our media library. They asked me to tell you that. If you want to play it, you can play it on-site or off-site. And like a choose-your-own-adventure sort of style of narrative, it does have those specific elements, but it often takes up a lot of different sort of semiotic sort of qualities that speak to us about what we might expect about it. It's not Detroit, I am human. It's Detroit, become human. It's about learning to ask ourselves what choices you're going to make in a game that speak to your own sort of ethical quandaries and decisions you might make. The choices you make when playing a video game are not the choices of your everyday life. I don't know about you, but I have one chance at this life, as you do. I can't just restart. I can't just save and try again. So in a game, you might be tempted to make slightly different choices, but what those choices say about the kind of ethical narrative you're building for yourself are certainly fascinating and interesting. Now, when I've given a talk like this before in the CRX Learning Commons, which I encourage you to visit today to see some interesting stuff happening with digital paint and VR as part of Steam today, this is a game in which you take on the role of these 3 different androids. Now, when I say androids to you, I'm certainly talking about someone who's close to human. They're not cyborgs, they're not half human, half robot, but people who are meant to stand in as human-like figures becoming human. And the game is actually really well known for its very intense, very violent, very graphic sort of ways of approaching moments of choice and moments of quandary. This is Connor here on this side, and I'll advance a few slides. I don't know these buttons. I can just leave the three of them up there, that's fine. Oh. There, I probably went too far. This is Connor. And Connor is the latest model. He's the iPhone 10 of Androids. And he is working for the Detroit police as a hostage negotiator. So he's there to deal with intense situations where human life is in peril, and human life is possibly something that needs to be saved and sorted. Has anyone tried the opening demo for this game? So let me graphically paint a picture for you. You're called in very early to a hostage situation involving an android male and a young woman on the top of a condo high-rise in downtown Detroit. And you're asked to sort of either spend time exploring the environment where a murder has taken place and now hostage taking is sort of on its way, to gather information, or to go and engage the subject right away. And like all good researchers in all of our disciplines, I'm sure you know the more we know about something, maybe the better we'll be able to talk about it. But it's something that asks you to think about time, place, space, and those dramatic unities that are so essential to theatrical practice. I don't want to get too Aristotelian on all of you, but the way we create drama is through a cinching of time, a cinching of place, and the actions that have to prevail there. Hamlet becomes so dramatic because everything is colliding in those particular instances. It's a very controlled environment. This is not something you're playing online with other people. You're playing it in its own sort of setup and designation. But everything from as simple as how many steps you take towards your hostage taker can change their emotional reaction to you. You quickly discern that you're dealing with an android like yourself holding a human girl hostage. Does that change some of your thoughts? Would you be a little bit more callous with someone who's not human? Remember, you're not human. And you watch for yourself as your chances of success, much like an ever-growing taskbar on our computers that's slowly filling up, tell you you're at 80% success or 40%. And every action that you take will start to change those things. 100% is not the ultimate outcome. Each sort of narrative moment in this game has up to 6 different possible outcomes. And you'll notice that the hostage allows us to take different points. This is my favorite thing. The first thing you can do is, there's a fish who's fallen out of an aquarium. You can put him back in the water or just leave him on the floor. And that might already sort of paint sort of the ethical choices you'll be making for yourself throughout. But you have a whole bunch of narrative trees and branches that evolve for you throughout this experience. And ultimately, it's something where you can choose to play it again, try it again, see what you might do differently, but ultimately think about all the possible outcomes, and sometimes in human interaction, there are not good possible outcomes that can come from it. You're learning to realize that you as an android are capable, or you as a player are capable of some of these emotions and ideas that are coming together. In my work, this brings up 3 central sort of ideas that I'm focused on, and those are the central questions that surround how we talk about theater in these kinds of virtual environments. Is it the same thing as going to the NAC or going to the Little Theater and seeing a play on stage? And it certainly is in some components. It's not the same as just turning on Netflix. It's not the same as just reading a book, but it involves concepts from across all these arts disciplines in a very interactive and exploratory way. We're particularly interested in the kind of extension of ourselves that emerges from it. How much do you begin to emulate Connor, this kind of perfect 25-year-old chiseled white dude who looks like a swimwear model that we're playing throughout most of it? And most of these actors were actually motion captured. Marcus, you'll recognize him from Grey's Anatomy, if you notice in the center. I don't remember what his doctor name is. But. So these are actual actors who've been used to sort of capture and create these artificial people that we get to inhabit. So what extensions to ourselves do we get to explore through doing these sort of moments? What sort of an actual kind of full body sort of experience can we have, being shocked, being terrified, realizing that time, action, and place are not on our side? Likewise, what are the kind of different modes of production that are being engaged with here? I don't know about you, but I grew up at a time when I didn't have the internet to tell me how to solve all the video game problems I played as a kid. I'm talking early Nintendo Entertainment and all those things. And now we might have certain things that default to tell us the proper direction and guide us. But what sort of things can we gather out of the suggestions of time, place, and space within it? Likewise, what sort of socio-cultural questions emerge for us when we sort of what's being put onto the screen, onto the game console, in front of us in different environments. What do you guys know about Detroit? Anyone from? Anyone hail from 8th or 9th mile? No? Okay. Detroit as a place is going to function as a place that is itself kind of a middle of America place that has faced questions of class and ethics, questions of incredible fortune and influence through the automotive industry, but incredible sort of class changes and shifting sort of politics and parameters, where questions of race and identity and gender certainly circulate very thoroughly. I know there was, I think it was the University of Michigan that offered a house to a visiting professor as part of their package, because there's a lot of dilapidated and abandoned homes and a lot of issues surrounding social welfare and income that are happening for a city that's going to become our model for talking about what it means to be human and not human, or what it means to be different classes of citizenry that are present. Make no mistake that when you're playing this game on the high-rise in your first level, you can see Windsor, Ontario across the river directly as a place that, you know, at one time Canada was also a place people would escape from issues of slavery, control, and androids themselves here become seen as second-class citizens, constantly called tin cans by the human beings that walk around them. This is all a very socioculturally veiled way to talk about questions of racial class warfare and sort of equality that America may be coming through. But ultimately, what I'm so fascinated with is this idea that we're so overwhelmed with this idea of perfection, of completion, of being able to make complete achievements. And part of the challenge of playing Detroit is that it's not always about being able to make every choice, because you won't have those options. You can replay it, but options open or lock off to you going forward as you work through these different spaces. And how much do these androids then become an avatar for the choices you might make if they don't represent your gender, your race, your class, your experience, your knowledge points? Likewise, we talk about this in performance theory as kind of explorations of the kind of mutual sharing that we have with avatars. I'm sure you all have a version of yourself on Twitter or Instagram that people see that may not be the perfect you that you ever see every day, but that kind of shared relationship that we have with these surrogates who are meant to sort of stand in for ourselves going forward. I encourage you to give this game a try even if you don't want to play it, because one of the best things about it is Chloe. I don't think I have an image of her in my PowerPoint, but she's the android who's your menu guide. She's there when you turn the game on. And the longer you let her just stay on your screen, the more she'll figure out things about you by, like Facebook, checking all of your game history and your play history. And she'll even say things like, it's 10 in the morning, shouldn't you be at work? You know, if you turn it on during the day. Or, why aren't you sleeping? It's pretty late at night. It's nice to see you again. I've seen you a lot this week. And she'll continually interact with you like a kind of android surrogate to kind of remind you that you're playing the game, and what's it mean to interface with technology in this way? What's it mean to have a shared relationship? When I open a book again, the book doesn't say, it's been a long time since I've seen you. But here we have the game actually doing that for us. With Marcus, we witness him being a character who will spend a bit more time directly confronting questions of overt and direct class and racist sort of potential within this game. As the only actor of color of the three that you play in this game, it's important to notice that part of Marcus's sort of placement in leading a rebellion or leading a kind of revolt, if you want to have it, from the android community is like taking to the streets for public action and political action, and being able to sort of collectively gather enough people together to find ways to react and move beyond it. My favorite thing about his narrative within it is this is actually a chance where you get to paint and do art. He's the android in service to a well-known Detroit artist, a great visual artist. And you'll get chances to paint within the game yourself. And I love that these pieces of art become part of the space in which you work, both as a servant, but also as an emerging artist. You know? So exploring what it means to create digital art in some of these different spaces. But things like the mundane, I don't know if anyone has played The Sims or is familiar with The Sims. You know, the idea of playing a game where all you do is go to work and make lunch and go home and have a nap and walk your dog all sounds like not the most fun or play-based game to explore. But Marcus's jobs are often very mundane. They're going to pick up groceries or items for the artist that he works for. They're taking the bus. And in this game, androids ride at the back of the bus. Sound will remind you of anything you've heard of prior. So there's an android zone where you're not supposed to be with the humans, directly sort of implicated and involved in it. So taking time to play the mundane, and I don't think I have to sort of, I have in my notes here to remind people that playing is the central sort of motif in my discipline. In theater, it's about creating play, and in games, it's about engaging with that play, or engaging with the idea or act of playing going forward. But what's most interesting about some of the ways that this game actually works to sort of complicate and trouble some of these different ideas, and it does come to us from David Cage, who is the director of Heavy Rain, if you've ever played that for the PS3 or other entertainments. He's from France. He's providing a very clear, critical, social, cultural sort of commentary on American life. But the character of Kara is perhaps the most interesting, because for us, she is reset right at the beginning of the game. There's an Apple store for androids. You take them in, you update their firmware, and you reset them. And like us, she's not entirely sure what her sort of role and place happens to be. Has anyone had the emotional sort of struggle of playing the Kara level at all? Has anyone seen any of it? Well, Kara's story is that she is owned by a man who drinks a lot and smokes a lot and has a lot of rage issues, and appears to have been left by his wife with the care of his young daughter. I'm not sure why the wife didn't take the daughter with him. He seems to have some problems with dependency and other things like that. But it actually engages you in the physical and time-based decisions of trying to decide what your job is to intercede. Almost like an emergency call on your phone or something going forward. When you first get back from the store after being reset, you have to clean the house. And as you're cleaning the house, you hear him yelling at his daughter upstairs about how she has to get to bed, and if she doesn't, he's going to come upstairs and make sure she gets to bed. And it's not a comforting feeling. These are not games where you play to win. The idea of being involved in someone's domestic abuse situation is not something I want to be in, or maybe any of us want to be in. But it does ask us, when are we allowed to cross lines or not? And he's actually set up invisible barriers. This is very VR-ish of it, but when you try to go upstairs to stop him from hurting his daughter, you first encounter a barrier. Like you're almost not allowed to do that, or any of us isn't allowed to do that until something has actually happened. And the game begins to sort of really take shape with some of the physicality. Does anyone play any Wii games or anything with the new, have you tried any of the Nintendo products? They have physicality attached to them, doing gestures, doing things in that vein. And the game controller for us in Detroit Become Human will follow many of those specific requirements for us to shake it in certain ways, or move it, or swing it. And all of those are used to mirror us trying to get in the way of a man about to commit domestic abuse against his daughter. And it's not comforting. And it's not something where you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's constant. You have to put yourself in the presence of it to sort of move through these environments. But, and perhaps some spoilers here. What's even sadder is that halfway through the game we also realize his daughter is not actually human either. She left with his ex-wife. He has two robots that he uses to recreate his moments of getting too drunk and too aggressive and too in their face, to night by night replay his sort of domestic moment of breakup, his moment when his family fell apart. That's really, really quite touching, terrifying, and sad to realize that you're an android being reset, constantly going in, and so is the little girl who you're trying to protect. Sounds a little like he spends too much time with his devices, and maybe that's a criticism for how some of us are on our phones now, or constantly doing other things where we're connected to other worlds or other places. I don't know about you, but I see more of my extended family across Canada via these things, and I'd like to see them more in person. And maybe that's a bit of a criticism of how this game is reminding us that too much time with these robots, and there's the little girl there, it's really hard to see, but become part of it. These are the designations. All androids wear a dot on their head and a triangle on their vest. Anyone know the triangle symbol that they're evoking here? That seems a bit reminiscent of past genocide or transgression. Thank you, yes. So triangles that were used in camps in Nazi Germany, in concentration camps, to designate people of difference, of various colors and spaces. In the game, triangles and the dot change to let you know if someone's red for aggressive or green for calm, using some of that non-verbal communication to do that. But it's really a game that reminds us about these levels of second-class citizenry and the kind of anger and frustration that's circulating in our world today surrounding human differences of culture, skin color, place of origin, and otherwise. And it's a game that makes us ask questions about ourselves. One of my pet projects, and I'm planning to do a forthcoming article for Playwrights Canada Press on this, but future articles is, I don't know about you, but I kind of get this moment of weird, unexpected pride when I find out there's one drag queen on RuPaul's Drag Race from Canada right now, or when Canada, or Toronto, or Ottawa, or Montreal gets a shout out in a movie, or a place, or a situation. But sometimes those shout outs come with their own sort of questions about who we are and what we represent. Canada, in this instance, is going to be the place that, like the Underground Railroad, androids need to escape to. Because in Canada they can live, we're android free, but we don't put them into prisons or put them into camps the same way. And it becomes this kind of constant reminder that, like seeing Windsor in the first instance across the way, and knowing that the last level of this game with Kara involves crossing the Ambassador Bridge to Windsor, or taking a boat across the river, and making decisions about how you cross a border, become a huge part of how it's sort of still talking about what Canada sort of means to some people in our North American sort of designation. Despite the United States voting in the Android Act as early as 2028, the Canadian Parliament has yet to be pushed back on a decision as to whether or not to permit androids in or out of our country. As a result, they're still not sold in Canada and have no official status in Canada. But these questions surrounding the decisions we make independently or not, I don't know if Canada decided today to ground its Boeing 737s or not. Did they? They did, okay. Did the US decide that too, finally? But we still were on the fence until we heard what the United States would be doing. So these questions around our own sovereignty and our independence come up as something that's very emotional and very present for people. Part of my interest in gaming also comes around in terms of how we have human involvement and human roles that we play in co-op games. Yes, I play Fortnite a little bit. And what these games entail in terms of our participation, our personalities, and our roles within them. And what does it mean to sort of espouse Canadian variations of ethics and difference and culture in those environments? I often get assumed to be American if I'm on voice chat with a bunch of other players, and sometimes I have to assert some of the differences or opinions, or remind people about what some of those things necessarily entail. And it's, I don't have a clip of it, but I absolutely love that in this game they've done their homework, and it looks exactly like every customs agent, Canadian customs agent you've ever seen. English, French, c'est un ton choix, de faire ton choix when you cross. But you do have a moment to cross a border, to try to covertly cross a border and think about what that will mean for your freedom and this other little girl's freedom. And it's very didactic, it's very pronounced. It is a game that wants us to think exactly about the choices we can make. And we played this in class with Monsieur Fremont. He did come to spend time in class with us to play it. And we often came to the same conclusions. One student finished the hostage taking with 100% and it was still a terrible ending. And another one had like 20% success and seemed to get everyone out alive. But our kind of obsession with thinking about proper and complete ways to do things always the same way, or celebrating moments where different experiences can mean just as much to most of us. I know the play is closed right now, but we just had a production from an MFA candidate in the Department of Theater that turned our theater into a nightclub. And you could listen to different actors on different tracks on headset throughout the whole experience and follow different characters around. So for many people, it was a fascinating way to think about what changes when we change the parameters of where we play and what sort of ideas come from it. And three kind of central questions that I'd like to kind of conclude part of my talk with today that I'm really interested in are thinking about what sort of outsider forces are determining how we experience things. Whether those are games, books, paintings, art, speeches, what are those outsider elements and influences that are part of it? Likewise, what happens when performance kind of experiences an unexpected sort of moment for ourselves? I do follow esports. I'm a big fan of Overwatch League right now. I'm all about, I can't decide if I'm Vancouver or if I'm Toronto and cheering for which team. But moments where gamers, where players, where people make choices severely affect outcomes and results. Stepping in at the right moment, whether it's through guidance, coaching or not, to make a risk or risk something in a game can change quite a bit for everybody. So what happens when these performance moments unexpectedly sort of emerge for us? Likewise, what does thinking about life as an overall performance add to those exact sort of experiences? I don't know about you, but if I'm already pretty tired and had a long day at work, the last thing I want to do is do something where I need to be more aware and on board with everything. A good bath and a book usually is fine to fall asleep, but when the energy is right or when the right sort of people present themselves, a lot of achievement and things can happen for unique groups through games, on public forums, and especially in the CRX classroom where we're using Twitch and live broadcasts to talk about what does it mean to broadcast. People out there, maybe I'll let you follow my channel if you want. My online name is Super Professor because like Mario, I'm a regular professor in life, but when I game, I'm Super, you know, Super Mario. It's just that simple. But thinking about what happens when we push things beyond the containment of these things, and when we remind people that they're not just entertainment. Games are not just meant to distract. Maybe the odd Fortnite game is, but certainly there are ever-present questions surrounding those different emotions and feelings that can come throughout it. And the freedom that can be represented. I have a young son who's not at the age of playing Minecraft yet, but I know I grew up with Lego, and I hope he'll grow up with Minecraft as that same sort of stepping stone towards world building and exploration, and thinking about what those things entail for us. So for theater department work, we're trying to really push theater beyond the boundaries of the stage and around the sort of proper sort of investment, and remind ourselves that it has an active principle in games, in our social lives, in politics, and other places. Before I take any questions, I would also like to remind everyone that we are teaching and have recently taught theater and gaming in the new CRX classroom. It will be offered again this fall. At the moment, it is currently largely left to our majors, but we are interested in knowing if there is interest from people from other faculties or other departments within the arts who would like to take gaming classes. And if that is the case, I'd encourage you to, I was going to bring a sign-up sheet, but that seems so anti-technology. Send me an email. My email is pjk@uottawa.ca. Why? Because my dad and I have the exact same name, and we're both doctors, and we both work at uOttawa. I kid you not. So I'm the initials. He's the P. Kuling at uOttawa. He works at the Riverside Hospital in medicine. I work over in theater. We're divergently different scholars, but I don't know how that statistically happened, but we work at the exact same place. But please let me know if you're interested in taking something related to theater and gaming, because we're looking to expand the gaming course offerings between history, political studies, English, theater, into new avenues and open them up not just arts majors, but majors in general overall. And so thank you for listening to me talk today. I'd be happy to take some questions or have some conversation. So I'll start out with one other thing. In our gaming course, we do everything from Tetris and puzzle games and active ways to break apart scripts to classic games, looking at arcade games and pinball. We do 2 weeks of playing Dungeons and Dragons with actual DMs, because there's nothing more theatrically creative than inventing a character and role-playing with other people. We also explore popular titles, everything I mentioned from esports with Overwatch and Fortnite that are kind of ballooning right now, but to other lesser known and early examples of theatricalized gaming. I'm really proud that we look at things like Sierra Online from the 1990s and looking at old Kings and Space Quest games, and a whole unit on kind of the first attempt at live action gaming with Phantasmagoria and kind of old sort of early video capture. And I'm talking like a pixelated screen this small with a few actors in front of a green screen, trying to give you a sense that it's both filmic and theatrical and gaming at the same time. Either one.
I'm curious about the challenges related to the development process. When you're making a game with so many possible narratives, for example, do you have to follow every single path for verification purposes while on your effort?
Yeah, I would leave that question more to one of my pals who's a game tester over at Bungie, who would be absolutely sure to be able to tell you that. But yes, I think having outcomes for all these possibilities is certainly a way in which we think about fully experiencing the game. But one thing I like about Detroit's design is it encourages you not to go back. It encourages you to live with the decisions you've made, like a single life or single instance of the game. But I mean, there are, I think, up to 16 different endings for each character, so that would be, sorry, I'm buzzing on 48 different outcomes overall for the whole entire game. And what's so unique to me is that sometimes small decisions, I'd like them to have even more influence over something. You know, how quickly you complete a scene, not just the right choices. But yeah, I'm sure in testing and all that, I'd love to see these games expand with more options down the line.
I was going to ask about sort of how you determine the relationship between the more improvisational theater reaction to people and versus the, while it's sort of open, it's still closed. It's closed to 48 options. Do you foresee an instance in the future where it's more improvisational?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would say in terms of the improv theory related to this is that often improv is driven by external stimulus, you know, suggestions, situations, how many players or actions. And it's still functioning that way, but I like the way that it can be a bit more immediately emotional and visceral. We played Friday the 13th, the new online game, and I've never seen one of my students run as far from Jason as she did in a way that became emotional for all of us. And then it's also different if we were to play today, to play with 40 people watching and how that would change things. So I think it merits some consideration with improv theory and sort of devised creation where there's 8 or 9 of us and we're working with whatever parameters we can think about. But right now it's simply just about pushing this performance theory element upon it to ask some of these larger sociocultural questions, and I'm sure that's part of my evolving research pattern for sure. Thanks for the question.
So I'm a teacher. I teach high school math and computer science, and a lot of things you said resonated with me. But one thing, question I had. You talk about having like that game experience. After you talk about gamification, and one of the things that always kind of like twigs me out a little bit about that. I use gamification, but on the same hand, it kind of twigs me out to make me feel like, am I like the mad professor in like with my students or the? Sure. And it worries me a little bit. So I guess my question is what do you think that like educators can do to move more from maybe having a little more responsibility for that gamification? Because a lot of times I think we end up, I mean, with all the good intentions towards them learning, we end up with more game, less learning value.
Yeah, and I think the question should be that we need to remind, whether it's in grade school, whether it's in external ways to think about it, or in university classes, that so much of the historical research I've done, while I would love to gamificate it and know everything and get every bit of detail that I can, there's a huge amount of imagination and creative potential that has to go into filling in the gaps in historical discourse and sort of that creation towards it. As educators, we want to give every tidbit we can. We want them to find every little secret Easter egg that we can. But at that same time, it's not the realities of our current world and situation. So reminding people about the beauty in filling in those gaps in the lack of knowledge, and not trying to go in predeterminedly. I'm often, not always frustrated, but the wiki pages that tell students how to read Chekhov and Strindberg before we ever do in class, I say, why don't you just start by opening it, and we'll get there. We'll figure out who Miss Julie is over time. Maybe she's more complex than the wikis can ever tell us. So it's good to remind people about that imaginative potential, and sometimes some games do that better than others. And we talk about this in theater studies too, about not just gamification, but museumification. This idea of like consolidating how we understand something to the little bit we get through our headset and a little bit of info and dates and specifics, when really it's about thinking about those experiences. And sadly, we probably need more, I'm not pitching this, but we need more active, exciting learning classrooms that make for this. I could not have taught this course without CRX, without 3 full stations where we could have trios playing together, offline, in combination. And it's great to think about that evolution to our education through complexes like STEM, through STEAM and other things. So that's really inspiring. I hope you work towards imagination with them. And, I think sometimes creative projects too, like getting them to draw their own graphic novels or think about what characters do.
I teach high school computer science, so I like using Khan Academy. They really have the creative computing kind of component there, where it's about designing what you're programming, and not just being like, oh, I accomplished problem, I'm done. Sometimes in the video game, it's like, oh, I finished it and I'm done, and that reflection we sometimes it doesn't play up, but it's truly there. Yeah. But we end up kind of maybe overselling it when they're not actually doing it, but they should. It's about, it's the beauty.
And sometimes it could be retrograde too, going back to older like text-based adventures, or things that get them to spend time realizing all you have is words. How are you going to be creative? Return to Zork with everybody if you can. So.
Thanks.
Well, if there's no other questions, I'll thank you all for being a wonderful audience today. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm in the Department of Theater with my initials PJK at uOttawa.ca. I'd love to get a sounding of if people are in undergraduate programs and interested in taking more game-based courses, whether we do that through the library or some kind of an open arts course out to everyone. And we will keep you posted on when we sponsor nights. We're trying to talk about having more game-based lecturing happening, not just from the theater side, but there's some great work in the history department, in the political science department, about ways in which games themselves, board, video, and all of that teach us about our current evolving world. So thank you everyone from STEAM for inviting me. Appreciate it.